This is the Limitless Athlete podcast. I'm Tom Foxley, founder of Mindset Rx'd and your host. And I believe that athletes must learn how to stimulate their vagal nerve.
I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm willing to work as hard as I can.
There is no past, there's no future, there's just this moment right here.
If I did that, if I can get through that, like, come at me.
Changing how I saw myself, like as a man, not just as an athlete.
It's okay that I struggle. It's okay. That's part of the deal. It's how I respond to it.
Your mind and your body, as we've discussed plenty of times on the Limitless Athlete podcast, are intertwined. You cannot separate one from the other. Your body influences the feel of your mind as much as your mind influences the feel of your body. That's why your head drops and shoulders round when you feel defeated in a workout. It's why you stand up tall when you win. It's why your breath changes with your mood and your heart beats faster at the mere thought of a workout. Your body assumes a posture, both physically and metaphorically, when you give it a repeated stimulus. If you think you're defeated for 20 years, your body, your gut, your brain, your nervous system assumes that to be the truth and acts like it. If you're going through extreme stress, your body recognizes the emotional state you're in and limits access to other states. When your body is fried from overtraining, over-caffeinated, over-breathing, and under-recovering, your thoughts and emotions will run amok. What this gives us is both a problem and an incredible opportunity. How do you break free of the two-way conversation of the mind-body? Isn't it interlocked and reinforcing the story you believe, the emotions you feel, the thoughts you have, and therefore the way your body performs? Well, yeah. But the two-way conversation also gives us two potential openings to change. One, the more traditional in the world of sports, the psychological work. And two, by regulating our nervous system. That is what we dive into in today's show with head coach Rachel, and she takes the lead today and she interviews Jessica Maguire, a vagus nerve master and physiotherapist. Expect to learn how your vagus nerve influences your emotions and mood, how to tone your vagal nerve for better performance, the habits that you can integrate into your life for better performance, and so much more. Now, I bring you Coach Rachel and Jessica Maguire.
Jessica, welcome to the Limitless Athlete podcast. We are so excited to have you here. As I was saying before, I took Jessica's masterclass on the vagus nerve a few weeks ago at this point, and just found it really interesting and helpful for me, both as an athlete and as a mindset coach. So welcome. We're really excited to have you here.
Thank you, Rachel. I'm happy to be here.
Wonderful. Really want to start by kind of getting to know you a little bit. So tell us about yourself and how you became interested in teaching people and athletes about vagal tone and the vagal nerve.
Sure. I actually started out learning about the vagus nerve. It was actually 20 years ago, which pains me to say, thinking how long ago it was. But without knowing it, I was studying the main connections. So I looked a lot at athletes and looking at their ECGs while they exercised and analysing ECGs, which is where we hook an athlete up with those little electrodes and look at their oxygen consumption and things like that. So that was really fascinating. But understanding heart rate variability definitely ties in with a big part of the vagus nerve, because we know how it connects to the heart and controls the beats of the heart. And then a lot of my other study at that stage was on what we call metabolic biochemistry, which is really all to do with digestion and the gut, but also looking a lot at microbiology. So we teach a program that looks specifically at the gut-brain axis as well. So I was studying it from back then, but really where my interest came from was after finishing that degree, I completed a master's of physiotherapy, and I worked a lot with people with very chronic conditions like pain that wouldn't get better. And often things would cluster together. So it would be, say, anxiety, pain, gut issues, and maybe insomnia. And so it was something where I really wanted to get to the root cause of what was going on. I mean, we hear people say, oh, stress is so bad for us. But I think that doesn't quite give the true indication of what's happening. And so I probably kept studying right through since that with different postgraduate trainings, particularly on neurology or looking at the different nervous systems. And that sort of led me to put together, a little bit like the masterclass you went to, workshops for my patients to help them really get back in the driver's seat, if you like, of their own nervous system. And then that sort of went quite, we took it around Australia, and that was really, really popular. So we decided that there are a lot of people that needed that help. And that's what led to us to where we are today.
Yeah. Thank you. Can you tell us about the vagus nerve for people out there who've never heard of it? They don't understand what gut-brain axis is. Can you just give us kind of the rundown of all the important things they need to know?
Absolutely. So it's a bit sneaky with the name, the vagus nerve, because we sort of picture one nerve, but it starts at our brainstem. So if we ran our hand down the back of our head, we'd feel there's a bony ridge, and going in from there is our brainstem, and it runs down both sides, and it's more a series of connections. So we have branches that come to the heart, like I mentioned. We have branches that go up to the face, so it's involved in communication, speech, listening, expression, and gestures. And then we have a very big branch of those neurons or nerves that go down into our gut, and it touches almost every organ. So we could, it's huge. We could compare it in size to the spinal cord, and yet it's not as well spoken about as the spinal cord. Now, most of its fibers actually run from the organs up to the brain. So we say 80% of those fibers are communicating information upwards, and that's sensory information, like what we feel. And that's where I really love this work, because we can really make such a big difference to how at home somebody feels in their body. And so much of that sense of when we are anxious or we feel the sense of helplessness or shut down, we often leave the body, or we cut off from the body, and we're off in stories or thoughts, or we're off in somewhere else, not in our body, feeling at home. And so with the vagus nerve, there's physical health improvement when we work on it, but also emotional health and even relational health, because of it changes how we talk to each other.
Oh, I'm so interested in asking more about this. So what I'm hearing is the information from the vagus nerve is mostly traveling from the organs up, so from the body up, and is giving information to the brain. What happens when the brain receives the information?
Yeah, it's a good question. So what you touched on, or you asked me before, Rachel, I didn't actually answer, is say looking at the gut-brain axis, what that is. That is that connection of the vagus nerve coming into the gut and communicating information up to the brain. So we do see there's various connections. And what we used to just say was that the vagus went from brainstem down to the organ and back up. And this is where it gets really interesting as to what we say is mental health, what we say is physical health, because we like to separate these systems. But it's really one continual feedback loop. We can't say it stops here, starts here. So some of that information will go to areas like the brainstem or lower centers, where we will have changes in things like our respiratory rate, our heart rate, some things we won't even notice. But some of that information goes up to higher centers and communicates particularly with an area called the insular cortex. And that's involved in how we feel sensations inside our body. So things like butterflies in our tummy or a racing heart. And interoception is the word used for that. And it's one of the most fascinating areas of science. Like, it's just exploding with research, because a lot of that has been linked to things like eating disorders, gut disorders, chronic pain. We really see it's a important facet of our health in that physical sense, but also in our level of arousal in our physiology. So some people, research has shown, people who are anxious may tend to fixate on sensations that are more negative. We say negative in quotation marks. And they will get stuck on that sensation and sort of can't put their attention on anything else, which then would drive thoughts of something bad's going to happen, I'm going to fail, this is going to go wrong. And then on the other side of that, it's been shown after chronic and traumatic stress that some people will have lower activity in the insular cortex, and they'll actually ignore sensations. So they'll deny, suppress, cut off because they feel a bit overwhelming. And unfortunately, that's not so helpful, because it's like, when we get hangry, we ignore being hungry, and then all of a sudden we're like, I'm so hungry. It's like I'm almost like worked up about it. So a lot of what we're looking at for people is how we can help improve that connection between the brain and the body. It's an inseparable connection, so that it's physical health improves, but also I'm going to say the word resilience, which is we don't swing up to the highs of anxiety and down to the lows of shutdown or burnout, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm hearing, and this really resonates with Mindset Rx'd and our methodology and philosophy, which is that mental health and physical health are not separate from each other. Both on a, perspective level from the individual, your mental health and your physical health are tied in your experiences, but also from what you're saying on a scientific level, they literally cannot be separated from each other. We're one organism.
Absolutely. And it's so been put forward to us, this model that the brain is up here in charge of, commanding over the body. But, we know that the microbiome can cause anxiety and depression if it's not balanced. We know the beats of the heart will change the activity in the brain. There's a particular rhythm to the gut as well, and the movement through that will change the activity in the brain. So
interesting.
That old paradigm of the brain is up here and in charge and our thoughts are all that matter, it's not really the case, and it's probably not helpful for people who are really stressed to argue with their thoughts. We can do certain things, but it probably is keeping people stuck in a little bit of anxiety when they try and just be more positive or reframe it or argue with what's happening in their thoughts.
I was talking to an athlete today and shared this experience with her myself earlier this weekend. I was feeling frustrated, and then I felt frustrated with myself for being frustrated. So it's like that meta frustration and that separation of, the brain is in charge. And if you're in control of your own brain, then you're in control of everything, creates a lot of shame for athletes too. Because that's what you're saying. Like they get stuck because they think, I can't fix this.
Yeah. And it's a second layer, isn't it? Like another layer comes around it of resistance of like, this shouldn't be here. So we really give ourselves a hard time.
We really do. You mentioned a little bit about that anxious state and that overwhelmed state. Can you talk us through a little bit about the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system and what those feel like?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we look at the different nervous systems, I'll just take a little bit of a step back to give a bit of a framework. If we were to say we hear people talk about the nervous system, but we can say there's the central nervous system, the brain and the spinal cord. But what we're talking about is the autonomic nervous system, and it's divided into having two branches, as you've said. So we used to just look at this as sympathetic, parasympathetic, and it was like two branches, very simple. One speeds us up, the sympathetic, one slows us down, the parasympathetic. But over time, what research showed was that some people, when they slow back down from, say, let's say they're driving along and a car comes onto their side of the road and there's like that rush of, oh my goodness, quick take action, which is very, very helpful for us. So we'll feel that sympathetic activation. Now, with something that's acute like that, where it's, quite a scare, we'll be profoundly aware of that activation in our system. So that can feel like mobilizing energy of heat or tension through the chest and shoulders. We might feel our heart go fast, but particularly the body will notice it, like maybe we clench our teeth or grip the steering wheel tight. So that's part of our system to help us take action. And I just want to put in here that stress is nothing more than our mind-body system mobilizing energy for us to face whatever it is we need to deal with. And that's very healthy. So stress is actually, it's not bad for us. We just need to recover from it, and we just don't want it to be too much. So that response of the sympathetic state releasing this energy, that saves our life. Now, to slow back down, this is where the vagus nerve comes in. We can use our vagal brake, which is the part of the vagus nerve that really runs to the heart. And so let's say after that, I feel myself slow back down after that stressful event, and I might loosen my hands on the steering wheel, my shoulders drop, and I feel that deep breath of, whoa, oh my goodness. Maybe there's a passenger next to us who says, oh, are you okay? And we talk it through, and then we feel, oh my gosh, that was so scary, but we're okay. And it might take 15 minutes for ourselves to ease back down. So coming back to that state of what we call regulation would be where we come down into that other state. But for some people, they go into a stress response like that. And when the vagus nerve isn't functioning well, they end up getting stuck in that sense of anxiety for a long period of time. And then eventually, to slow themselves back down, they use a primitive branch of the vagus nerve, which we call the dorsal vagal state they go into. And that's a little bit like putting a handbrake on a car. So we slow down, putting this handbrake on, and we feel ourselves almost collapse. So it's a sense of dropping in energy. It's energy conservation. And for some people, so we can see this sort of two ways. This can happen if we are in prolonged states of anxiety because we have chronic events, like say we're going through a divorce, business hardship, just unrelenting stress. Eventually we exhaust that system of the sympathetic where our vitality comes from, and so we get burnout. But for some people, if they've been through something that's quite traumatic, then in that time they may have frozen, like can't take action, and almost it's like they've left the present moment in a way, like out of body or out of present moment. And so if they learnt from what we call an area in the brain called the survival brain, that's how they need to cope, or that's how they need to respond to cope with stresses, they might keep responding to stress with like a freeze response. So this is, oh my gosh, I can't do anything. So some people, it's been coined learned helplessness, but I think that's probably puts a little bit of blame on people, and I don't love that term, but it's almost that the nervous system learns to undercope with stresses, and so it keeps going into this state of shutdown, withdrawal, and freeze. So that gives us 3 states. We have the sympathetic, and then we've got a state where we'll call it our ventral vagal branches working, so where we're regulated, and then we have that shutdown dorsal vagal state. So the old system of sympathetic, parasympathetic was just a little bit too simple because it didn't equate for that other state where some people shut down.
Yeah, that's so helpful. And I have seen this listed as fight or flight and freeze. Do you find that still applies largely when people experience those states?
Yeah, it can be a useful way to look at it. I would just say with freeze, some people will freeze, but some people will completely collapse, as in feel this is hopeless. So let's say it's an athlete and they're playing, I'm going to just say a game of tennis, and it's a really important last, getting close to the end of the game. Pressure is on, and their brain or their level of anxiety has been creeping up, because if they lose this, they know that, let's say, they're out of that championship. So the pressure keeps escalating. Now, they could freeze, which is like that, I can't take action, I can't do anything, something really bad's going to happen. So it's more like a unable to respond. But see, a lot of people with freeze will say they still feel a lot of anxious or anxiety, but they can't take action, as where the other response, which is more of like a collapse or shutdown, would be the athlete would drop their head and be like, there's no use trying, I give up. So can you see there's a bit of a difference energetically? Like there's a bit of a, like this energy conservation, the collapse, the heart will slow right down. They'll actually feel like almost exhausted, as where the freeze state will still have a lot of high energy, but
clenching.
Stuck.
Yeah.
Yes. So they're a little bit different, but it's still helpful to frame it that way as well.
That's so helpful, because we work with many athletes who do experience exactly that. They reach a point where they have hit, the pressure is on. We work with a lot of high-level competitors. The pressure's on, and and I can watch it happen with some of them. They go like this. Their posture changes. I can see that they're breathing a little bit differently. And I know at that point in their head, it's all, I can't do this. My shot, I blew it already. It's over.
Exactly. That's it. So the posture you'll see of someone who's in that shutdown or going into that state, I'm going to say it's like the helplessness. The spine will collapse. Like, you sort of see this, can't do it. And that's where the breathing slows right down. So for them, you're going to try and lift them up a little bit, as where someone who's in freeze, you might try more to connect with them or bring them back into the present moment of like, can we connect with what's happening here? And that's a lot of what it is, because these survival responses take people away from the present moment. They're almost off into a story of, but if I fail, then that. And really, we need to look at what's happened before that, because the part of our nervous system that's detecting if things are safe, dangerous, or life-threatening, it happens outside of conscious awareness, but it's never the same. So we're always changing with how we detect what's happening in our environment, if it's safe or not. And so let's say somebody had a really bad game and it was horrible for them. They felt totally helpless and stuck, and they just, couldn't get it right. And it was shot after shot was just terrible. The next game they go into, it's almost like they might respond with, the survival brain might respond with, I'm hopeless, I remember this. oh, this is hopeless.
Right. Yeah.
So it's like showing or teaching or embodying a different experience before we get to that. So there's a bit of a pattern that, you know, people might see or recognize that for themselves, that under pressure, they keep doing a similar response. And that's where the survival brain has learnt.
How would you advise? So it sounds like presence is a really important piece of this, is coming back to the present versus assuming that we know the future based on the past.
Yes.
What are the methods that you found effective for athletes to bring them into the present moment and find ways to not keep writing that story over and over again?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think I would say that the biggest thing is a sense of connection with somebody else. So whether that's a coach, a partner, somebody else who's there that almost can be like, hey, you know, I'm right here with you. You're safe. It's going to be okay. And I remember when Kelly Slater won Pipe, that was a few months ago, and he said that the morning of Pipe, now physiologically, he is competing against guys half his age. So, I mean, you know, he's obviously knows the wave, but it's still, you know, there's guys a lot younger than him. And he said that the morning of Pipe, his partner connected with him and basically sat and said, you know, all you need to do is just come back to the breath, come back to the present moment. And she was with him in a very caring way.
Yeah.
And for resilience, we talk a lot about don't be codependent, but co-regulation is a superpower. So if we're around somebody else who's grounded, who's not necessarily calm, but is like with us, and our nervous system attunes to that, we will mirror that experience. So he even took it into the competition from that morning. And he spoke a lot about that, although his mind started to wander off into, you know, even when athletes start picturing themselves winning, I think it's coming back into the body. So it's sometimes challenging to go, we don't want to say stop thinking about that, because again, that's resistance.
It doesn't work. Yeah.
No, in the present moment, we can connect to the environment in ways where it might be, okay, I can feel my feet on the floor. I recognize that I'm right here, and then tuning into the body. So let's say for that person who is collapsed and feels helpless, that might be where they learn to go, all right, I need to grow tall through my spine. I need to open up through my chest. Just notice how that changes my system. Okay, I feel myself come up a bit. And it's really small shifts that happen over time. We want to look at as well, but you know, that's in the short term, like, and peak performance comes when we can match whatever's in front of us with the right amount of arousal. So that's very valid. But then we've got to look at as well, okay, well, how can we train our system so that away from actual competition, our survival brain doesn't respond in this automatic way? And so there's a few key pillars to what we call skillful regulation. And we need to look at the fact that whatever it is that we do, like some people say to me, well, if I massage my ear, am I like stimulating the vagus nerve? And the things we want to look at is, from whatever you practice, do you notice that there's a strong kinesthetic change in that stress response? So, for instance, you will feel that, there goes that holding on. People will often yawn, like discharging that stress. Some people might feel a twitch in their body, a gurgling in their stomach. It's almost like the energy moves from being to again.
Yeah.
So that's what we need to experience. And also, just like training, we need to load the nervous system. So out of competition, what can be really helpful is, rather than, doing something that's easy and not really stressful. I mean, you wouldn't train your body to lift really light weights. Well, you wouldn't train your nervous system not to have some stress. So we want to have it where we hit this sweet spot where we actually would load the nervous system with some stress and then teach it to cope and do it again and do it again and do it again. So the key to this is bioplasticity, where we used to call it neuroplasticity, but it's not really accurate anymore because we know there's changes in the immune system, changes in the hormonal system, changes in the whole person. You know, it's not just the nerve cells that change. So for what we would look at is 6 weeks. If somebody's they continue to respond in this way where they get stuck, their performances, you know, you'd want the stuff that's done out of out of competition, and the things that you can do in competition. Both are important, but if you truly want to change the nervous system, there's got to be a bioplasticity reset, particularly in your past, if there's like stresses that haven't been recovered from. And that's, I think, I can't think of anybody who doesn't have some situations like that.
Thank you for saying that, Jessica. We all carry trauma with us, whether we are ready to admit it or not. It's very, very true. Yes. This is so interesting. I want to go back to what you were talking about with co-regulation, because many of our athletes will have coaches with them at those high-level performance pieces. What should coaches know about helping their athletes regulate without letting their athletes learn to over rely on them, because their coach can't be there all the time supporting them and providing that co-regulation? What's the balance that they're looking for so that they're teaching their athletes to soothe themselves, not doing all of the soothing for them?
Yes, this is a great question. I would, first of all, working with anybody, look at what is their typical pattern or how do they respond. So if we look at this as like a window of neurobiological limits, which is a really fancy way of basically saying we've got this zone where we perform well. If we push above it, you know, if we override it, we're going to go up into anxiety. If we undercope, we might not get in there. So for the type A personalities who are a bit driven, well, and that's a lot of athletes, but let's say
it's a lot of athletes.
But we'll say most athletes are probably that way. We tend to go over our limits. So we will say, I've just got to push more. I can do this more. So for instance, this is an example. So I had in my 20s a physiotherapy clinic, which was great, such an amazing time in my life. But the expectation I had on myself was to treat a full caseload of patients all day, manage a team of staff, and run a business. So, it was constantly overriding the limits of what I could cope with for a day. Yeah. So in the end, I would end up getting to this stage of and feeling anxious, overwhelmed. And eventually, I think I had 2 bouts of burnout, ended up with some heart palpitation and heart condition stuff and chronic gut issues. So I had to learn when it was okay to say, I'm overriding my limits and I need to stop. So for a coach, you need to see, okay, is that your person? And there's a lot of fear-based, beliefs and drive under that. It could also be shame as well. So they might be, I need to achieve or do more to be enough. Yeah. So really looking at, is this person internalizing when things go bad? Oh, it's my fault. I need to do more. I need to be stronger. I need to push. I need to grind. I need to hustle. When really for a lot of people who tend to go into that state, they would be better to do less. They would almost be better to go back to the basics. So a coach might just simplify and say, right, that doesn't matter, that doesn't matter, that doesn't matter. This is all we come back to again and again and again and again, without all of that chaos and noise and, anxiety. Now, the other people, and this is more what I would say I saw with patients with chronic pain, but I'm sure there are some athletes too. They never push up to what they could actually do. So there might be something, say, for an athlete who they need to, I'm just going to say, a surfer to learn a particular technique, but there's some risk in it because, you know, they could hurt themselves. Mm-hmm. So they might just avoid ever wanting to do that. And then they never really get an opportunity to see what their potential is. So that's more of fear avoidance. And so with those people, now, whenever you bring something novel or new to the nervous system, it will be seen almost as a threat. Yeah. So we need to do things like low stress arousal with new things. Yeah. So as a coach, that's where you might look at, okay, I need to slowly introduce things with this person, not go, let's go, as where the other person will be like, I want to do it, let's go, I can do it. But then if it's not perfect, they might collapse. So it's really getting to know. It's really getting to know the inner workings, but also what we might say our stress reaction coping habits are. So, you know, I mean, I can see myself in both situations in times in the past. And for an athlete, they might be like, okay, I'm going to, you know, boom and bust and push my way through and no pain, no gain. Yeah. And then they probably could end up injured. But then in other areas of their life, you know, maybe they're too scared to date. Maybe they're too scared to go and try something career-wise. So it's, I think, looking at a whole person as well, not just in one particular facet.
Hey, if you're enjoying this episode, chances are you'll enjoy our free ebook, How to Stop Substandard Self-Critical Plateaus and Unleash Your Potential. It's a step-by-step guide to finding your mojo again and getting back to the athlete you know you can be. It's free. You just have to stick your email address in and download it. To find it, head to mindsetrxd.com/ebook. That's mindsetrxd.com/ebook. Now, let's get on with the show.
Oh, we so 100% agree. We don't magically step into the gym and suddenly we're only a physical body and only an athlete. We're bringing our relationships and our jobs and our kids and all of those pieces of ourselves with us. You know, you mentioned the collapsate being less common for athletes. And I believe that you're right. The one place that I see that happen a lot where athletes need what we would describe as almost a progressive exposure therapy to things is when they're injured, because they have that fear of re-injury. And so I think what you're describing is looking at their program and saying, okay, we're not going to go all the way back yet. If you're feeling that fear, you're not ready, we'll slow it down a little bit so that you can progressively expose yourself to what feels threatening.
Yes, and just continuing to load and load and load until it's, you know, as close back to competition. So hamstring injuries, so many re-tear. It was, the studies on it were quite concerning, and I remember teaching out, the study, like working with athletes who had the tears, and they found that there was a little bit of a gap because physios were working with them to be like, okay, you're ready, but it was more rehab exercises, but without loading enough. So this is the same with, you know, I suppose I am looking at the nervous system through the lens of what I saw with a lot of chronic pain people was we need to elicit stress. We need to push ourselves. Like I think being uncomfortable is something that we can learn to get better at, particularly if we want to have growth. I mean, if we want to stay the same or decline, that's fine. We can be comfortable.
We can.
But I think
it won't last forever though, will it? Life will get in your way. and you know, there can be so much reward for
when we do get that growth. You know, I love nothing more than increasing the weights that I lift in the gym. It just is so satisfying.
Totally.
But it hurts. It's uncomfortable. I push myself and, you know, it's ongoing. So I think that when we look at the ways that it's uncomfortable in the short term, you know, what that brings us. But to know that it's not just the physical system we need to train, it's also how we are showing up in competition, you know, how we're showing up in training. And this is where a coach is just priceless because, to be honest, I can't objectively set my own trainings because it will never feel like enough. You know, there'll always be like, I should have done more. I should have had this. I should have had that. Or it might be on those days where I'm not feeling so motivated, where I can quite easily talk myself into, oh, no, that's enough. So I have a coach from my gym plan, and I think it's just so smart to have that set because you can't be objective with yourself. And we want to take the human, how do I put it? Those limits I was talking about, you know, the neurobiological limits. If we say it's like a window, that changes all the time. So, you know, on a certain day or a certain week, I could have, you know, things that are hard at work. Well, my limits might be smaller. And so if I then am training myself, that's where I could easily say, oh, I don't need to do that today. So, it's an interesting one to look at. I'm sure you see a lot of this with setting programs and things.
Oh, 100%. Well, and you're mentioning outside stressors impacting what happens in the gym and in competition. It's another reason why it's so important for us to be coaching a full person versus just their athletic endeavors, because we need to know, when stress is really high, then things have to be adjusted for inside the gym. What do you find are the most common reasons that athletes find themselves in either that sympathetic state or that parasympathetic dorsal state? What are the reasons that they get there? We talked a little bit about it.
Okay. So either way, whether we are seeing, I'll say, like a chronic ongoing anxiety, and we want to look at this as like being stuck in that feeling of stuck in anxiety, or a stuck down in either burnout, depression, flatness, or shutdown. It will happen either way, that the first thing that happens is the vagal brake or the vagus nerve isn't working as well. So if you were to imagine that you're riding, you would have heard this in the masterclass, but riding a bicycle downhill, you're just going to keep that little bit of the brake on. And that's what our vagus nerve is always doing to our heart rate. So if it was off, our heart would beat around 90 beats per minute. But it's actually an evolutionary thing where the development of the vagal brake was what enabled humans to work together cooperatively. And this is where humans thrived. So the vagal brake always being on, but when we have chronic and traumatic stress, so in 2020, I would see a lot of people come in because in Australia we had the bushfires first, then COVID hit, then there was the second wave of, and so people just weren't getting to recover from these huge events. And so they would report like feeling like always on, anxious, and they had what we would say low vagal tone because that brake was off. Now, it's normal for us to take or relax the brake a little bit. That's totally what happens in competition, where we feel that mobilizing energy ready, but we're not going into fight or flight. So we have still that, sense of activation. But say for an athlete who had low vagal tone, they might find that when they go to competition, and yes, they feel nervous or they feel that mobilizing energy, but they might go up into anxiety, panic, anger, reactivity, and they just way beyond what is good for competition.
Performing, yeah.
Exactly. So that's where our vagal brake keeps that sympathetic energy in check. And we want that sympathetic energy enough for us to do our best, but we also don't want it to be coming out so much that we're, anxious. And then where somebody would go down into that flat stage, that could be where the sympathetic system is exhausted because we have a loss of vagal brake.
Okay.
And then so there's always sympathetic energy being released. Once that is exhausted, so let's say, you've had a conflict with somebody really close to you and it was highly, highly stressful. And then you go home and you go to bed for like 2 days and feel like, oh my gosh, I just feel horrible. Or for some people working on a big project or to meet a deadline and then they collapse for a couple of days. So it's that kind of boom and bust. But also, as I mentioned, the thing will be is if somebody has had periods in their life where they were facing high levels of stress and felt helpless, they may automatically respond. It's like a model is formed or a map is formed from our past, and the map we use to navigate our life today can still be coming from the past. And so we project these past experiences onto the present. So for a lot of people who've had repeated stress where they couldn't do anything, like they felt powerless, then that's really where we'll see they might respond to stress in this, like it's a learnt response, it's conditioned. And so a big part of moving through that is unlearning. But for those people, a lot of it will be improving the vagal brake and increasing sympathetic energy. I would say I see this as well a lot with people who suppress anger, suppress, like it's like, I shouldn't feel this way, get down. And they use sort of like a shame-based approach to squash what is really inside them. If that makes sense. So we hear so much of this message of anger's bad. We shouldn't be angry. Well, anger is really bloody powerful. Like if someone oversteps a boundary and I feel anger and I use that to say, this is not okay, this needs to change, that is really powerful. So that's part of our biology. And if we squash it, that's where we can get stuck down in these states.
I so appreciate hearing that from you, because there is this sort of shame around feeling strong emotion, this sort of romanticizing of being stoic and basically like never feeling anything, which is unreasonable because we're emotional creatures and it's a rich part of our life. And feelings are teachers. I teach athletes often that anger, exactly as you said, is often a signal of a boundary violation. Resentment means that you're feeling envious of someone else having their needs met while you're not meeting your needs. Like there's so much to learn from the feelings that we have. And we tried emotional suppression back through the 60s, 70s, and 80s and found it created a lot of mental health issues. So it's really good to try something new now.
Absolutely. We're in a new time. I think the key that is helpful, I spoke about that word interoception before.
Yes.
And that's where we say we get models of interoception based on what we experienced in terms of strong sensations. And then we might continue to respond with the same old story. And this is where we need to bring those sensations into our awareness, slow them down, and then they can be almost updated. So it's like, hang on, that was that model from back then, but that's not what's happening now. But what's happening is a lot of people, it's a real challenge to see that, to work with that, and even to recognize the states of our nervous system. Like I've mentioned it, like we can know it, but we need to be able to read that from an interoception point of view. And that isn't as easy. It's not like going, oh, this is this information. It's actually saying, oh, there's that sensation. Oh, what does this remind me of in my past? Oh, it's just like that time when blah, blah, blah. So tracing things back can be really helpful. And especially if we can then sit with what's there and allow that stress cycle to complete from before, we actually then can come to today with a fresh new curiosity rather than it's always going to be like this.
Yeah, creating more hopefulness and a sense of empowerment.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. You mentioned bioplasticity and building that. And, we talked a little before about improving vagal tone over the long term and the short term. So just kind of synthesizing what you're talking about so far, it sounds like learning to sit with and feel our feelings, building that interoception is a really critical component of this rather than intellectualizing our feelings and trying to reframe, think positive, all those things that, again, we tried before and they just don't work. What else would you say is something that we want athletes to take away from? How do I improve my vagal tone, improve my window of tolerance over the long term?
Yes. So we spoke a little bit about this before. We said where we want athletes to feel like they can be, or where we want them to be comfortable, is where there is a little bit of that vagal brake coming off and that sympathetic energy is coming in. So they can learn to be in that highly charged state but still feel safe. And this is where play can be so useful. So play is like a zone that's a blended state of the vagal brake with that sympathetic energy. So if we put those together, so we want to create a bigger capacity to be in that state and experience more. When we look at play, what's useful is that there's a reciprocity back and forth with somebody. So we want it to be with someone where we feel that sense of, oh, this is like feeling so exciting, so there's that energy coming up, and there's like a back and forth, and part of it's spontaneous and it might be fast, and learning that, we can be in that space without there having to be a sense of anxiety or dread. And for some people, even without having to shut down. And so a lot of people say, well, where do I start? And, you could look at, comedy nights. You could look at even using something silly like taking photos. It could be Twister. It could be definitely playing a game back and forth, a board game. But it's very much about what is attuned to your nervous system. So when we teach people about their nervous system, there's so much variation that we can't say, oh, this is the one best thing for anything, because
of course
it's different for everybody. So I just invite athletes to really explore that sense of like who feels playful. I've got friends that we can actually be so silly and giggle and just it's total freedom of being yourself plus that spontaneity. So if there's people like that, and then also just how that feels to you, but that can just feel like, a real sense of being with other people who see you, attune to you, and there's that sense of safety is such a resilience superpower.
This is another time in our conversation that connection has come up. And I remember you mentioning that parts of the vagal nerve connections connect to the face. Can we talk a little bit about the importance of connecting? And I want to be specific, connecting authentically with other people, and how that improves athletic performance.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah.
So we'll see this through what we call our social engagement system.
Okay.
And when our social engagement system becomes active, our vagal brake will come back in. So what we're looking at is when we are around, when we get around somebody who's in their social engagement system, if we've been really anxious, we'll hear the voice of a person who's in their social engagement system with lots of variation in pitch and rhythm. So it's not necessarily talking in a calm, whispery voice that tells us that I'm so ridiculous. It's actually that they're, I know, I can't help myself. It's actually that there's like this change up and down and changes in rhythm. So, you know, when we hear parents talk to a baby, we'll hear something like this, and that is naturally co-regulating. Or we hear people do it with their pets, like, oh, you're such a good boy, hi, and then it's back down again. So that is all prosody, and we're doing it intuitively.
Yeah.
If someone was sort of anxious, we might hear a monotone voice down here, and that would be a clue of that fight or flight, because the muscles, the way the vagus connects with our muscles of speech and communication will mean that when it's active, there is that prosody. But once we move up into a stress state, the voice will become monotone because we lose that activation of the vagus. But also you'll often hear in people talking who are highly anxious, like more in that flight energy, it'll sound something more like this, where there's the breath every few words, and it's it is still technically monotone, but it's at a higher pitch.
High. Yeah.
Yep. And then someone who's in a freeze or collapse state, they probably won't talk much. So they won't be communicating as much. We can see on the face of somebody who has access to their social engagement system, the smile comes up into their eyes. So it's those lines around the outside of the eyes creasing that indicate that the vagus is connecting to a cranial nerve that comes into the muscles around the eyes called orbicularis oculi. So somebody smiling there, it means that there's an engagement of the vagus nerve. And that, even seeing that from somebody else who smiles at us with their eyes, it will start to bring messages, so, you know, under the level of conscious awareness of, I'm safe, this person's safe, it's okay. And then finally we'll hear it, finally it's listening. So when the social engagement system is active, if you and I were talking and we're at a party, but let's say we were really connecting, like let's say we both said, we work with people to help them function better, you know, whether it's athletes, and we were like, wow, I do that too. So even in that crowded room, the muscles of my middle ear would engage in a way that I could hear the sound of the human voice. So I'm going to really be able to just hone in on listening to you. But if I was in my sympathetic state or that fight or flight, that would change. And I actually would struggle to hear you, because from a physiological point of view, I would be hearing low frequency sounds, which are predator sounds from a survival point of view. So this is something for coaches to keep in mind. If you're really going to talk with an athlete when they're that wound up, is that useful? You know, is it more that you're just there with them and you might even touch, or you might get them up and standing and moving, or you might in another way connect to them and then talk to them?
Because they can't even hear you at that moment.
Probably not. But if you're there with them and you're in that state where you're regulated, I mean, you can still feel nervous, or you could still feel up and down. And that's probably another bit of a thing that I grouch about a little bit, is when we say regulated, we're not trying to create robots who are calm. You know, it's these waves of sensations coming and going is completely normal. But if we're a coach, we can really be that co-regulator for another person just by changing our state. And gestures are another thing, like the way we move our head. So if we see somebody who's uptight, shoulders up like this, eventually you're going to start to think, what's wrong, something's wrong.
Yeah.
And we have what's known as posture resonance circuits in our brain where, for instance, if say you were at the movies and there was a loud noise and you noticed people around you started looking and they looked worried and it was all tension, you would start to feel anxious just from seeing their posture change. If we see it in nature, it's what animals do as a herd. Someone's like, and then they're all to attention. So we're the same. And this is where that social engagement system will really help anyone come back to that state where they're regulated.
It sounds like the community that you're part of is really important in this too. Everybody kind of working together to be regulated rather than what we see in a lot of gyms where there can be cultures of staying in a super high regulated state all the time.
Absolutely.
Sounds like everybody needs to be on board with this co-regulation thing.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I think that gyms in that way help so much because it's not just the co-regulation and chatting with people, but just to solidify those habits of good training with other people is phenomenal, because that we tend to to belong to a group where we'll tend to perhaps not always do things that are serving us so well. So that's a more powerful driver. And this is where belonging to a group where these things are really valued is so helpful.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I totally agree with you. Jessica, where can people find you, find out more about what you do, and continue learning from you?
So the best place is my website, jessicamaguire.com. I do put quite a bit on Instagram because I do love writing about this topic. And my handle is, if you just looked up my name, Jessica Maguire, the handle is repairing the nervous system. So they're probably the best two places.
Wonderful. It has been such a pleasure getting to chat with you. I feel like we could talk for another 2 hours about this stuff and wouldn't run out. I so appreciate you joining us. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, Rachel. It's been lovely.
Thank you for listening to the Limitless Athlete podcast. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes or Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And whilst you're at it, please leave a lovely review for us. Or follow us on Instagram, which is at MindsetRx, so MindsetRxd. And you can keep up to date with a lot of interesting stuff coming your way, including a really cool workshop, a 3-day workshop that we're going to be working with you on how to go all in on your mindset and therefore all in on your physical potential. Anyway, stay tuned on iTunes, stay tuned on Instagram to find out all about that. And I'll speak to you soon for the next episode.